was immediately after the Garissa University terrorist attack. And it was sad, Honorable Speaker, that at that time, and I would believe it's still the case today, in the absence of having a coordinated way in which we manage our disasters and management of risks that would contribute to more disasters. At that time, Honorable Speaker, I remember when the terrorists hit Garissa University, and so many students were shot, some killed, some injured, and you can imagine the anguish that parents had. Garissa at the time was around summer times in Kenya, Honorable Speaker, but temperatures soaring to highs of close to 40 degrees Celsius. And I had an engagement, Honorable Speaker, with the medical officer who was serving in the region at that time and coordinating that disaster from Garissa. And as sad as it was, Honorable Speaker, those who unfortunately lost their lives, upon their bodies being taken to the morgue at the Garissa District Hospital, as it were then, the morgue could not handle the number of bodies that were being taken there. And bodies by that evening had started decomposing. By the time the government was able to mobilize resources from Nairobi to fly to Garissa, to even get fingerprints from the bodies that were already decomposing, it was not even possible. And I was told by those who were in the medical profession, when bodies stay under such temperatures, they get disfigured. And therefore, even fingerprints were disfigured. And that's why you realize it took a long time for families who are already notified that they have lost their loved young ones at the university, but they could not be able to identify what body belonged to who. And imagine the anguish parents had. Some, I remember, were accommodated at Chiromo University, Chiromo campus of the University of Nairobi, and there were harrowing stories of parents being subjected to walk from Chiromo all the way to Nyayo Stadium every morning, going to wait for buses at the Nyayo Stadium to see if they would be able to identify those who are coming in buses from Garissa, be able to get information as to whether they have lost their loved ones. And eventually, Honorable Speaker, I remember I engaged with one parent who had traveled all the way from West Pokot, sold his 3 goats to get fare to come to Nairobi. And he exhausted the money that he had sold his 3 goats through trying to get accommodation in Nairobi, and had to walk every day when they were eventually hosted by the University of Nairobi in Chiromo. He had to walk every day for almost a week and a half before he finally identified his deceased child from Garissa University. And that motivated me, Honorable Speaker, to ask myself, what is it that we can do to ensure that if such a disaster ever struck again, there is a coordinated way in which we can handle such a disaster or others, Honorable Speaker. And from members' contributions, you can hear the anguish even ourselves as members of Parliament have to go through every now and then, with simple disasters like the blowing off of roofs of our primary schools by strong winds, or floods. When floods ravage our constituencies, be it in Budalangi or somewhere in eastern Kenya, Kenyans are left suffering because there isn't a coordinated way through which government, both at the national level and at the county level, coordinates to handle disasters, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, we sought to have this bill, Honorable Speaker, to address some of these challenges, to ensure that we not only provide that legal framework for disaster risk management, but also to enhance the effectiveness and a coordinated disaster preparedness, how we prevent disasters, how we respond, mitigation and recovery from disasters, Honorable Speaker, because it is one thing to wait for disasters to happen, Honorable Speaker. We all know that for many years, Budalangi constituency has been ravaged by floods, or when River Nyado and River Nzoia break their banks, people will suffer. And you remember the famous lady of Sirikali Saidia, during the regime of President Mwai Kibaki. And that lady brought to the fore the suffering of the people of Budalangi from floods. And I remember government at that time moved from those calls to establish dikes and other mitigation measures, but we do not have to wait for Kenyans to cry out. We should be proactive. We should move ahead of time to see how we can not only prevent and mitigate disaster, but also ensure that Kenyans are able to recover quickly post-disasters, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, this bill seeks to address some of those issues and also to reduce disaster risks and vulnerabilities at the national and also at the county levels of government. Honorable Speaker, members are aware that every county government and even the national government has funds that are usually set aside for unforeseen emergencies. And these contingency funds, Honorable Speaker, are never utilized for the right purposes, and you find that a disaster hits a county and the county government of that particular county has no resources. Yet in their budgets, they had budgeted for a contingency fund for such eventualities and emergencies. By the time the disaster hits them, they are ill prepared and are always calling on the national government to come to their rescue. And therefore, we want to have a coordinated process so that we know how do we establish that each of our county governments are budgeting and providing funds for disaster mitigation and disaster management. How do we also ensure, as members of parliament who are in charge of budget making, that the contingency monies that are set aside to deal with disaster management are indeed appropriated for that particular purpose, Honorable Speaker, and also coordinate so that when it is a county level disaster or a disaster that is restricted within a particular county, the county can first utilize their resources before they go out to look for help. Honorable Speaker, also you have measures to know through a disaster management authority, Honorable Speaker, how can we even coordinate the mobilization of resources? Honorable Speaker, look at the COVID pandemic. We had, as a country, we had to set up an ad hoc committee, look for people in the private sector, in the corporate world, a few public officers, to form an ad hoc committee to mobilize resources to even be able to look for gloves and masks that were required to prevent loss of life, Honorable Speaker, and further spread of that disaster of COVID-19. Honorable Speaker, all these things have served to remind us as a country that we are always ill-prepared and we are caught flat-footed when disasters strike. And it is high time that we prepare in a way that we'll be able to enhance our own resilience to the impacts of disasters and other risks, and also issues that touch on climate change, Honorable Speaker. We are now in the discussions of climate change and, Honorable Speaker, how we mitigate issues to do with climate change. With the changing climate, Honorable Speaker, floods, hurricanes, Honorable Speaker, will become very common things. Honorable Speaker, if we don't take deliberate measures for reforestation, soil erosion, landslides will be so common, Honorable Speaker, and unless we have a system where there is somebody checking on what we are doing, both at the national level, at the county and local levels, Honorable Speaker, to ensure that even as we deal with climate change mitigation measures, we're also looking at the effects of that, the changes in our climate in matters touching on floods, as I said, soil erosion, washing away all the good soils and the nutrients that our crops need, Honorable Speaker, exposing us to other disasters such as hunger and droughts, Honorable Speaker. Landslides in those areas where they are prone to landslides, like in Murang'a County and other areas where Elgeyo Marakwet, Honorable Speaker, and West Pokot. You remember the disaster that struck us about 2 or 3 years ago. And I remember then, Honorable Speaker, when that disaster struck in West Pokot, even the minister who was in charge of the interior, the minister who was in charge of the small disaster unit that is hosted by the Ministry of Interior, I can't remember the name of that small unit, because there's a small unit within the Ministry of Interior that deals with disasters. The minister in charge then, the Honorable CS former CS Fred Matiang'i, told the country unashamedly, Honorable Speaker, that he could not access the disaster area because of the weather at that time, flying a military helicopter. But the then Deputy President, with a small civilian helicopter, was able to access that place, Honorable Speaker. And that also speaks to the disdain and contempt that some of our public officers had with Kenyan people, that you do not relate to the suffering of the people when disasters strike. It took the then Deputy President, who is now serving as our President, flying a private chopper and even mobilizing private resources from Kenyans to be able to help the people of West Pokot then. And I was praying the Member of Parliament from that area was here, Honorable Speaker, because you do not know when such other disasters will strike. But we do not want to find ourselves in a situation where our current Minister for Interior will claim that because of weather, when he has choppers that have navigation equipment, he could not access a certain place because there is no proper framework as to how you respond to such disasters. And we want to find ourselves well prepared, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I do agree with the committee's report that indeed, on hindsight, there are certain changes that we can make to this bill, and I agree with them on the deletion of some of the clauses, like clause 5, 6, and 7, that touch on the establishment of an intergovernmental council that will comprise 10 members. And I want to thank the committee and the chair, Honorable Wacha, and say I do agree with them, and we will support the amendments that they have proposed during committee of the whole. Honorable Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to support, as I also thank the many members who have spoken in support of this bill. Honorable Speaker, finally, because we are at a time and when the establishment of authorities and semi-autonomous sagas in government is a matter that is at the fore of our national conversations today, courtesy of the huge burden that we have bestowed on the exchequer on account of the management and running of state-owned enterprises. I want to state, Honorable Speaker, we must, during the Committee of the Whole, ensure that the National Disaster Management Authority will or should be a very lean authority that is more of a coordinating role, but not one that creates more bureaucracies to get money from the exchequer. It should be a very lean body that ensures that most of the money that will be appropriated towards disaster management goes towards the work of mitigation of disasters, management of disasters and recovery post-disasters, Honorable Speaker, but not into the bureaucracies of running state-owned enterprises or semi-autonomous government agencies. Honorable Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to support.
The Majority Leader, this is a very important bill. You are always very educative, and I'm happy the bill is coming from you. But I wanted to pick your mind for purposes of this general debate. Before you sit, I know you will have your opportunity to reply. I don't know whether you have the bill.
Yes.
Just something to signify to the committee that will be dealing with this thing with your approval. Look at clause 33. Or the other one can be given to the Majority Leader, so that as we debate, members are informed in terms of the areas we could, tighten. You see, it says that this authority has first to classify a disaster as either a county disaster or a disaster falling within the remit of national government before any action or intervention can take place. Assume it was something like that terrorist attack, and this classification is not timed. Even the terrorist attack we had at the embassy of the United States here. How do you see this, working? And at this up clause, you're saying until a disaster is classified by the authority, it shall be deemed to be a county disaster.
It's true, Honorable Speaker, that whenever a disaster occurs or threatens, I don't know how it will threaten, to occur, the authority shall determine whether the event is a disaster under this act, and if so, immediately assess the magnitude and severity or potential magnitude and severity of the disaster, then classify the disaster as a county disaster or national disaster, and see record the prescribed. Honorable Speaker, I think these are some of the issues, Honorable Speaker, on hindsight, I say we, together with the committee, will be looking at possible amendments so that it is clear that the authority is to determine, when a disaster occurs or when it threatens to occur, for instance, when it is raining and trees are falling off the hilly parts of Muranga or Elgeyo Marakwet or West Pokot, and there is a threat that there is likely to be a landslide. Then the authority, we cannot wait for the authority to determine whether that disaster will be localized in that area or whether national government should intervene, because it's quite clear that a disaster is likely to occur or one has already occurred. They should be able to move with speed and be able to determine the magnitude. And I think we'll do some cleanup in this particular section to make it clear. So that, again, we are not bogged down, as I was saying earlier, by bureaucracies also that we also create in law.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think in that endeavor, the committee should also look at even the definition of disaster is too broad. Anything that causes death, injury, or disease, damages property, infrastructure, or environment, significant disruption of life to a community is a disaster. You may end up in a situation where everything is a disaster waiting for national government, intervention. And as we do that, we also look at the fourth schedule in terms of the kind of disaster the counties can give them, so that we delineate them. The Honorable Dr. James Nikal, the MP for Seme. Honorable Millie, what is out of order?
Thank you, Chair, for giving me that opportunity. Chair, I just wanted to inform the Chair, based on actually what you've said, that if you look at the definition of disaster, there is also the word localized, so that when the committee is considering that amendment, they also must remove the issue of the word localized. And they also need to look at it in tandem with the Victim Protection Act that looks at victimization that have to do with the criminalization in nature, including terrorism.
The Honorable Millie Odhiambo, do you want to contribute?
Yes, I could.
The Speaker has powers, understanding order number 1, to reverse, so that you go before Honorable Dr. Nikal, because I've been with you long enough in Parliament, Honorable Millie Odhiambo, to know when you want to contribute and when you want to wait. Do you want to contribute?
Chair, I don't mind waiting. It's just that I thought because you are raising it at that time. Okay, so I don't mind waiting because he's also my senior.
So wait and make those presentations. The Honorable Dr. Nikal, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me opportunity. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important bill, and I rise to support it. And Mr. Speaker, the objective of this is to actually get a legal framework for coordination. And Mr. Speaker, emergencies on the disasters normally have an emergency element. So most disasters will have an emergency element. And if there's an emergency element, there is need for preparedness, and these are things that actually have to be done before. And then you have to get government systems that work through structures. So I support this bill because if you have to have an emergency response, you need to have pre-planned, and you need to work through government structures that sometimes are actually obstructive. Then you need a legal framework for coordination. And when you talk of coordination, Mr. Speaker, when you talk of disasters and emergencies, it is not often one department of government that is involved. It will actually involve many. It will involve security. It may involve the transport system. It will involve the health system, and all these will be various departments that are doing various things, but in a disaster, they have to come together to deliver. So I support that this bill tries to address that. It is even more important for us that we are working in a devolved system, where apart from just having departments, you also have 2 levels of government, and therefore you have to say who is going to manage a disaster. And because of the emergency nature, there is sometimes no time for that decision to be done. Therefore, getting structures is important, and that, Mr. Speaker, is why I actually support this. It gives us those structures. And if you're dealing with risk, then it's not only taking action, but actually looking at prevention. Every disaster, we must find out why it happened, is it likely to happen again, and put in place preventive measures. This bill actually talks of classification of risk, and I think you have raised the issue of clause 33. But we should look at it more of classifying the risk than waiting to classify the disaster itself, because by that time it is extremely late, and therefore we are talking of risk management. So we must then classify the risk. If we have a history, and it also talks about information, we have an information, we have a risk. What we talk of Budalangi, we talk of Nyando. When the rains are coming, we know that these areas are likely to have that, and therefore what risk do you put in place, and even what classification. And if you have a classification, Mr. Speaker, then you can use algorithms. You can't wait until it happens, then now say, okay, this one is there. You say, if this one happens, this is what needs to be done. That is how you actually manage emergencies. You don't wait. You have algorithms, and with those algorithms, you also put up SOPs, how you respond, yeah, so that you know with this is what you do, and this is what is be done. And then if you have structures, that also will tell you who should do it. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I support the Intergovernmental Council of Disaster Risk Management. We must really look at the word risk more than just disaster. If we start thinking of what they will act when the disaster has occurred, we're missing the point. So it is the risk, then the risk then is between the council, the intergovernmental. But Mr. Speaker, in our devolved system, we have had a problem. We have a body called the Intergovernmental Relations Technical Committee. You are a lawyer, but you know that we also created something called the Secretariat of the Council of Governors. Those 2 things, actually one is illegal and the other one isn't working. So even if we form these intergovernmental structures, we must be willing to actually get those structures to work. Otherwise, there will be points of argument. We then create an authority, and what I like about this authority, when you have a risk, if you have assessed your risk, then it must come in pre-planning, and if you are going to have pre-planning, you must have a budget. The worst thing is when you wait until you have a disaster, and then now you are starting to look for funds. And the leader of majority was saying, sometimes the government is not prepared, and therefore philanthropists take advantage to seek a lot of credit for it. But the philanthropists are good, but the philanthropists should work within a structure that is laid out. In fact, when you have a disaster, you then have to need to control philanthropists, because quite often they can actually derail the issues we have. In 2007, when we had IDPs, we had to go in and control the philanthropies that were coming within the structures that are put in place. If you work here, this is what you do. You come with your food, this is what you do. We come with your medicines, this is where you put it. Otherwise, they seem to take over. So I like the council that are put in place, I like the authority, but the authority I like because they're pre-planning and the budgeting so that there's a framework. Even those who are giving you funds, sometimes it is better for them to just give you funds and work through a structure than actually to have one person coming with a load of food, the other come with a load of medicine. Nobody has checked whether these medicines are registered in the country. Nobody knows whether the food is expired, and now people are just running around helter-skelter. So that those authorities will do that. Then we have the county disaster risk management committees. Again, if we can have all these structures, but if we don't have the standard operating procedures which are within these committees and risks that have been identified and set so that you do this and this, these committees will not work. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill, and we look at it and look at areas where you really need to look at risk rather than wait for disasters to take place and then try to classify them and manage them. You should be prepared. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Martin Owino, MP from Dewa. Honorable Millie indicated she is not in a hurry.
And Speaker, I heard her very well.
You will speak after Honorable Martin Owino.
I heard her very clearly. And thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many has been said about this bill, and I just want to add my voice to it. Disaster management is a process, really. It's a process that starts with prevention, which I want to emphasize, that we really need to think of preventing what occurs so that we are not caught unawares. Especially the floods, the fires, some of these things are time bomb, and we know. Prevention should also, which I didn't see elaborated here, Speaker, we should have a very elaborated research system to know what kind of disasters we have in our country and when they strike. For example, in health realms, you may find seasons and the flus, and that should be well noted so that we prepare, we give flu shots before it becomes epidemic. Also, there's an element of preparedness. When it strikes, then what do we do as a people or as a system we are trying to put in place? Preparedness is one way of solving a problem. If you're not prepared, the way our counties are not, most of the time you find that CDF is called upon. School has burned down or bridge has broken, but we can hardly cope with those. But if we have this structure where we have a national or federal government supporting the systems on the ground, then we can easily manage disasters. Mr. Speaker, there's an element of response. When it happens, sometimes it needs rapid response. And sometimes what you just mentioned caught me. When the disaster is classified as county, and it is more than a county, then what do? That will cause a delay, and when you delay in response, then you have a loss of lives and even more disabilities. So I think I do support what Nikal says. We rather classify risks more than classifying the disaster, because there's no time for classification when disaster strikes anyway. The other element which I want to add on to this, which should be magnified, is when you have responded, there will be loss of lives, unfortunately, and also there will be disabilities. How do you manage aftermath? That is always left out. For example, if properties are stricken, you may have people homeless. Do you have shelters where they can go? Those should be factored in, and the committees should consider about that. So the nature, the extent, and the severity and occurrences, all these packed together in a research portfolio should inform us as a country, so that when disaster is about to or is almost, we can know and proactively respond to it. But I think this is a good bill, and I thank the authors. I I don't want to say much because I know Millie is almost on half it, and I have exhausted my point. So I yield my time to you, to Millie, if that exists. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You've also taken over the role of the Speaker. I can assure you the Honorable Millie Grace Odhiambo, MP for Suba North, should have the mic to make her contributions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to support this bill and thank the committee for bringing it, or the leader of majority. And I also want to indicate at the onset that it's a good thing that now we are having a legislative framework on disaster risk management. Indeed, I'm actually glad that it's clarified, because I remember very clearly we had this bill in the last parliament, but I do notice that it had lapsed. Mr. Speaker, because most people have spoken a lot to the issue of disaster risk management, I just wanted to talk about some of the issues that I've seen that are thorny in the bill. One of them, which I was actually intervening because I didn't know that I would have the time, is on the issue of definition of disaster, that because they have included the word local, it actually limits, because then a disaster can happen that is beyond local. But when you use the word local, it means it limits how we respond when you actually make disaster a local affair. And we have seen from experience, and even from what the majority leader had given, for example, of COVID. Do you classify COVID as a local issue, or is it a national issue? Then, Mr. Speaker, one of the other issues that I've actually picked that is of concern for me also is the definition of disaster risk management. And I'm encouraging the committee, even though I've proposed amendments already, that they should expand it to include having in place a permanent structure of disaster risk management at the county and national level, identifying and mapping disaster-prone or vulnerable areas, situations of people as part of management, because we already know as a country which areas are very prone to flooding, for instance, but we always operate like it's a shock when it happens. And then issuing early warning of imminent disaster. Mr. Speaker, if you go even to BBC and other areas now, you actually see alerts that are issued all the time. And even if you look at today's I think media, I don't know if it was Nation or what, that I was reading, the US is already giving an alert on a possible terrorist attack in Somalia. That is actually a preparation for disaster. Why don't we have things like that? And then relocating populations in case of imminent disasters, and using technology to better management disaster. Mr. Speaker, one time when we were in Indonesia with the Committee of Budget, I woke up in the night, I was sleeping, and I actually thought I'd overslept and forgotten to switch off my TV. And Mr. Speaker, after a while, I actually discovered that it was an automated system coming through the TV that was warning us that there has just been an earthquake of this magnitude, and we should go out and we should do XYZ, you know, for a focal point. And Mr. Speaker, by the time I was walking down, I think God gave me an amazing ability to sleep. I met people walking up. I had slept through the earthquake. And when I reached, I found people that were in centralized places. Should we have an earthquake in Kenya, I can tell you it will be shocking how we'd react, because we don't have those centralized places. In Indonesia, everybody knows there's an earthquake, every hotel has a centralized area. We should also have those automated systems even in our hotels, not just for earthquakes, but for other things. I'd want to say, for instance, my own county, Homa Bay, is an earthquake-prone area, but we have sightings. I know Honorable Gladys will be doing something about it. She's just done her first year. But in terms of the law, those are the things that we need to be putting. Mr. Speaker, the other issue that is of concern to me is the issue of the definition again of emergency preparedness. And I'm encouraging the committee that what we need to add as part of emergency preparedness is having a policy in place for both the national and the county government, but also having in place a monitoring system for both the county and national government, having in place an early warning system, a continuous public education and awareness to the public on disaster risk response, including emergency numbers and centers. and having in place facilities and equipment for effective and quick response in case of disasters, including fire trucks, land, water, and air ambulatory services. Mr. Speaker, right now, if we were to have a disaster in Fangano Island, we would actually have a challenge because we don't have a boat ambulatory system. I know we've raised it with our governor and she said she will bring it, but I'm not just saying it in relation to Homa Bay County. What about other areas that are, covered by water? If there's an emergency or a disaster, how do you respond quickly? And because now the systems that we have there are mainly private. And even for us to mobilize them, you might find the ferry is in Kisumu or wherever, and they are slow. If you are dealing with disasters, you need quick response. So for me, those are some of the issues that I'd want. Again, in clause 4, one of the guiding principles should be protecting vulnerable groups, including women, children, persons with disabilities, and the elderly in cases of disasters. Because we have not mentioned them specifically, but disaster affects different groups differently. When you have women and children, when you have disasters, women will be prone to sexual abuse and all other kind of issues. How do we respond to women in disasters like that, where they no longer have any habitation and whatever? What about menstrual hygiene and things like that when you have disasters? And then I'm also suggesting that we need to have the Minister for Gender because of that issue in the management authority. I know we are also trying to make it smaller, but even as we make it smaller, we need to have the Minister for Gender, who mercifully a lot of times also doubles up as the one in charge of the young person. But I know that now it's not the same, but it would be important. And then, Chair, on the issue of governance, it's an issue that I've been speaking to a lot on this floor, but I will re-emphasize it. Chair, we have this tendency that you find one Kenyan in 2 boards, or in serving a government office, but also in a board. When there are many Kenyans who don't have anything, why don't they also serve in those boards? Or we have one person that have exceptional intellectual capacities. Those are things that we also must address. We must also, in terms of governance, one of the other issues that we must also look at is the way we phrase the powers that we give the chair of the board. And one of the powers that we need to give the board is not to dismiss somebody for absenting themselves, but without justification. Chair, one of the other things that I'd want to say is also that we need to ensure that we take a zebra approach when we are appointing the boards or the officers to any of the bodies. And so that if you have a male chair, you should have a female vice and vice versa. Mr. Speaker, I've written a few of the issues. I'm not going to mention all of them, but I just want to complete by saying one of the things that I've told you before. I've sponsored the Victim Protection Act. And one of the clauses in the Victim Protection Act is the issue of victimization, mass victimization arising from a crime. So for instance, the issue of terrorism. And one of the things it does, it says that, this is actually born of the fact that when we have seen all the times that we have seen terrorist attacks, how have we responded as a country? Every single person has walked in there to respond, not the officers. Secondly, in their response, we don't preserve the evidence. We don't also look at the victim. We don't see, like what you see if you actually look at a lot of the programs in the US or other areas, that they will preserve the dress that the person is wearing for purposes of identification or any other identifying features. I was very shocked one time when I went to Kenyatta National Hospital, and I saw recently that they wanted to dispose of bodies. And they were telling people to just come and dispose of bodies. And I said, and I asked them, do you keep in such cases of disposals any evidence that when somebody one time wants to identify a person who is lost, they can do that? And they said, no, they don't have. I was actually shocked. So that is why, for instance, one of the people who used to be an ODM member called Matunga, who disappeared from Gwasi, to date can't be traced because there is no DNA evidence. This applies to mass victimization as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I've proposed several amendments to this bill. It is a good bill. It is a timely bill. I encourage the majority speaker to be more futuristic and stop looking backwards and always blaming other people, including Honorable Matiangi, because the country has moved on. With those few remarks, I support.
Thank you, Honorable Millie Odhiambo. Always very informative. The Honorable Dr. Suzanne Kiamba, the MP for Makueni.
Well, I think it is in order to have a disaster management authority, I wish to raise some few concerns. And one of the concerns I wish to raise is the fact that in this country we are working very hard to create very many structures. We've made so many structures that ends up having no budget or money to do what we wish them to do. I want to give an example when we come to issues of water and issues water. You will find it at Nahadi, you will find the Tana, you will find quite a number of Walma, and you will find like around 3 or so structures. But when you look at the budget to deliver what is supposed to be delivered, Honorable Speaker, we tend to find it quite wanting. So I'm of the opinion, like we have a ministry under which disaster risk management is there, is under that particular ministry. And you realize that the institutional capacity within the ministry is very weak. My concern is, why should we continue making more structures while we have institutionalized structures that don't have capacity? The moment we create a structure, Honorable Speaker, we attract a budget. We are living at times in this country when the money is very scarce. So when I sit down and listen to this bill, I'm seeing a new budget coming up. And I'm wondering, Honorable Speaker, when we continue creating these many budgets of overheads, when will we have money for the outcomes which we want to deliver in this particular country? I also find it very interesting, Honorable Speaker, when we look at the fact that disaster is something that happens once in a while, not every day. But the moment you create an authority, you have to have a budget that has to be taken care every month. In my view, disaster should be mainstreamed because we have health-related disasters, we have water-related disasters, we have food security-related disasters. In my view, an authority is too much an overhead. We need every department to mainstream the risk management and disaster. And by that way, we reduce the cost of running these disasters right from the national level up to the county level. Otherwise, we'll have so many structures and no money to deliver the kind of outcomes we want to our own people. So, Honorable Speaker, of course you can see I really do not agree with this motion of having more structures. As a Kenyan representative, I'm interested in delivering outcomes to our people. Even look at even our own leadership structure. A Kenyan at the grassroots there is represented by a president, a deputy president, a senator, a woman rep, a governor, a member of parliament, an MCA. I've not mentioned the chief and his assistant. What reaches that voter at the ground under all that particular process? I'm feeling even when we go to service delivery, we are going still to the same, let me not call it mess, to the same kind of thinking where we create so much structure that when it comes to service delivery, we spend most of the income without bringing the change we want. Honorable Speaker, I am opposing this motion because in my view, I think risk management is not something that happens every day and should not have somebody sitting 365 days to wait when disaster comes. But people in every sector, people in every ministry, we should strengthen the disaster component, and by so doing, we can deliver seamless outcomes to our people when disaster emerges. Otherwise, Honorable Speaker, I stand to oppose that creation of a structure. I wish it could be integrated in already existing structures that we have and we deliver the service. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Dr. Suzanne Kiamba is saying when Parliament is struck now, you should not have some authority sitting somewhere still deciding whether there should be response. We should build in disaster response within systems so that there is no need for authority. I hear her to be saying that. And Honorable Martin Owino, of course, says that we should classify disaster, those ones which the counties need to respond to, those ones the national government, instead of waiting for a disaster to sit down and then plan. Everybody would be dead by then. The mover should now reply. Honorable Dr. Undo, I see you, but I remember I gave you opportunity to address the nation on this particular one. Yes, sir. So mover.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I want to, on behalf of the Leader of Majority, the Honorable Kimani Ichingwa, the member for Kikuyu, I want to take this opportunity to reply. Now, Honorable Speaker, first of all, I want to thank all the honorable members who got an opportunity to contribute. And I want to, Honorable Speaker, say that we have taken their concerns, we have taken their contributions, and we are going to critically look at them and see how we are going to incorporate what honorable members have raised while debating this bill in the next stage. So, Honorable Speaker, I also want to take this opportunity to thank the members of the Regional Development Committee for doing a good job. But, Honorable Speaker, equally I want to say that, of course, wherever they are, they have also seen the concerns of honorable members, having gone through the report, having gone through the bill, and they have also made proposals. Honorable Speaker, I think I have seen members talk about the definitions that we need to recheck. I've also heard that from you, the Honorable Speaker, we have to relook at clause 33. And many other proposals that members have given. As a committee, we also proposed amendments to this bill, which of course we're going to bring in the next stage of this bill. So, Honorable Speaker, together with what honorable members have proposed, we are going to look at it again, and then come back here and we agree as a House on how we are going to move forward. However, Honorable Speaker, you have seen that the majority of members have supported this bill. And from their contributions, this bill would not have come at a better time than now. So I want to sincerely commend them and thank them for their support. And of course, whatever they have again raised as a way of we need to relook at, I think is welcomed. Now, Honorable Speaker, disasters have been managed from various quarters in this country. Like, for example, when we had a landslide in the West Pokot the other time, that was my constituency, Sigor, part of Pokot South, and some other regions of this country. Responding was by the Kenya Defense Forces, mainly. And in certain instances, it was even very difficult for agencies and even well-wishers to access the areas that had landslides. So it was really very, very difficult. And I think now, by coming out with this bill, which, Honorable Speaker, now seems to provide a legal framework so that we have coordination of disaster risk management, because as it is now, it is done through the KDF. There is an a disaster operations center at the Ministry of Interior. We have agencies like the Red Cross and others. So it's important that we have a framework, a legal framework, so that all these actors involved in disaster risk management and disaster risk management get coordinated and even take stock of even the actors in disaster risk management. So we have even proposed in this bill that we are going to have a register of all the actors and players who are going to do something about disaster. Honorable Speaker, the fourth schedule to the Constitution provides that disaster management is a shared function between the two levels of government in this country. That is the national government and the county government. That is why, Honorable Speaker, we have here proposed a National Disaster Risk Management Authority, and at the county we have a county disaster committee that will be headed by somebody who will be competitively recruited. And in that way, I think we are going to have a situation where the two levels of government coordinate and work together to address cases of disaster. Honorable Speaker, you know, the people in the counties are Kenyans. So we don't have people of the national government and people of county government. So whenever a disaster occurs, it affects Kenyans. And if this bill is going to help in terms of reaction time between the time a disaster occurs and the time it is being addressed, then I think this is good. Now, Honorable Speaker, I know that the various issues that have been put forward will be taken into consideration. Now, Honorable Speaker, when this bill will be enacted into law, the enactment of this bill, Honorable Speaker, will lead to efficient and effective management of disasters across the country. During contribution here, that it may be too bureaucratic between the time a disaster occurs and the time it is being classified. But I want to say that probably that time, the reaction time between when a disaster occurs and when it is being addressed, it can be a very short time, because we have also classified disasters into a county disaster and maybe a national disaster. Where a disaster affects more than one county, we can call it a national disaster. And when it is affecting one county, then it can be a county disaster. But in instances where, even when it is affecting one county and the county is unable to manage it, then again, we call it a national disaster. So, Honorable Speaker, we have also said that the President can declare a state of disaster. So, and I think when the President also comes in, and when the magnitude of a disaster gets to certain levels, then the President can declare a state of national disaster. So I want to say, Honorable Speaker, with all the inputs by honorable members and what we have also proposed as a committee for amendments, I think this bill will go a long way to ensuring that whenever disasters strike, or whenever we have instances or cases of disaster, then I think there is a coordinated way of responding to disasters in this country, and probably even in a timely manner. So, Honorable Speaker, with those few remarks, I sincerely thank honorable members who contributed, and I therefore beg to reply. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you very much. Mover, for the convenience of the House, the question on second reading of this bill will be put the next time it will be scheduled for consideration by the House Business Committee. The Honorable, next order.
Order number 13, motion, reports of the Auditor General on the National Government Constituencies Development Fund for 5 constituencies in Vihiga County.
Mover.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that this House adopts the second report of the Decentralized Funds Accounts Committee on its examination of audited financial statements for the National Government Constituencies Development Fund for five constituencies in Vihiga for the financial years 2013-2014, 2014-2015, and 2015-2016, laid on the table of the House on Wednesday, 14th February 2024. Honorable Speaker, the Decentralized Funds Accounts Committee is a select committee established pursuant to the National Assembly Standing Orders 205B and is responsible for the examination of the reports of Auditor General on the accounts of, among others, the National Government Constituencies Development Fund and the National Government Affirmative Action Fund. Honorable Speaker, the National Government Constituency Development Fund has had significant impacts on our communities and on individuals' lives since its establishment in 2003. Honorable members can attest that the fund has helped transform our communities through the development and maintenance of infrastructure projects, especially in schools and other educational facilities, as well as provision of bursaries to needy students. These CDF-funded projects have stimulated economic activity in the constituencies by providing employment opportunities during construction and enhancing local infrastructure that supports businesses, leading to increased economic growth and prosperity. Improved access to education, on the other hand, has translated to communities being more empowered and leading better lives. It is indeed an economic stimulus program which should be cascaded to other development projects. Honorable Speaker, one important aspect of the NGCDA projects has been the participatory nature of the projects that it funds. The NGCDF often involves community participation in project selection, implementation, and monitoring. This has empowered communities to take charge of their development priorities and foster a sense of ownership over the projects, leading to sustainable development outcomes, unlike other development projects. Honorable Speaker, oversight over national revenue and expenditure is amongst the roles of the National Assembly as stipulated under Section 95(4)(c) of the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Further, Article 226 of the Constitution provides that an Act of Parliament shall provide for the designation of an accounting officer in every public entity at the national level who is accountable to the National Assembly for its financial management. In addition, Article 229(8) mandates this House to debate and take appropriate action on audit reports from the Auditor General. Further, Section 68(1) of the Public Finance Management Act 2012 provides in the earlier that an accounting officer of the national government entity, Parliamentary Service Commission, and the judiciary shall be accountable to the National Assembly to ensure that the resources of the respective entity for which he or she is accountable, accounting officer, are used in a way that is lawful and authorized and effective, efficient, economical, and transparent. In addition, Section 12(3) of the National Government Constituencies Development Fund Act, number 30 of 2015, provides that the fund account manager shall hold the authority to incur expenditure of the funds at the constituency. The fund account managers were therefore invited to respond to concerns raised by the committee in their capacity as AIE orders. Honorable Speaker, it is in line with these constitutional and legal provisions that the committee invited the fund account managers, both current and former, as accounting officers of the NGCDF to respond to audit queries raised by the Auditor General during their tenure. The committee also invited the board of NGCDF to respond to policy issues which were also subjected to audit queries. Information received formed the basis of, for the various recommendations outlined in this report, which are geared towards effective management of the fund. Honorable Speaker, the committee, while examining the audited accounts for Vihiga, Sambatia, Amisi, Emuhaya, and the Luanda constituencies in Vihiga County, the committee observed that in the financial year 2013-2014, all the constituencies examined had audit issues raised following the High Court of Kenya ruling on petition number 71 of 2013, which held that Constituency Development Fund 2013, establishing the Constituency Development Fund since an enactment of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was unconstitutional. The committee further observed that the issue was overtaken by events as it was addressed through the passing of the NG-CDF Act 2015 and its regulations 2016, which aligned the fund functions to national government functions. The functions were further aligned by the enactment of the NG-CDF Act 2023, recently passed by this Honorable House. Honorable Speaker, the committee also observed in all the constituencies, the Auditor General had raised issues on under expenditure or non-implementation of projects due to late receipt of funds in the constituencies. The committee observed that this was beyond the capacity of the fund account managers and recommended that the National Treasury should ensure timely and adequate disbursement of funds to the National Government Constituencies and Development Fund Board for immediate release to the constituencies. Honorable Speaker, the committee also observed that in all the constituencies examined, documents were filed late for verification during the audit period and recommended that the accounting officers should ensure that fund account managers comply with the provisions of Section 62(1)(b) and (c) of the Public Audit Act, number 34 of 2015, which provides that a person shall not, without justification, fail to provide information required under this Act, and without justification, fail to provide information within reasonable time that is required under this Act. Honorable Speaker, the committee also made some general observations and recommendations on issues which cut across 5 constituencies in Vihiga County as follows. Firstly, Honorable Speaker, in the regard to reallocation and use of emergency funds, the committee observed that some of the projects funded using emergency funds did not meet the threshold of the Section 6(2) and Section 8 of the NG-CDF Act 2015. The committee recommended that the NG-CDF Constituency Development Fund Board should ensure that the fund account managers comply with the provisions of Section C262 and Section 8 of the National Government Constituency Development Fund Act 2015, which provides that Section 6(2), once funds are allocated for a particular project, they shall remain allocated for that project and may only be reallocated for any other purpose during the financial year with the approval of the board. And number 2, Section 8(1), a portion of the fund equivalent to 5%, hereinafter referred to as emergency reserve, shall remain unallocated and shall be available for emergencies that may occur within the constituency. The constituency committee shall determine the allocation of the emergency reserve in accordance with the Act. And number 3, emergency shall be construed to mean an urgent and foreseen need for expenditure for which it is in the opinion of the committee that it cannot be delayed until the next financial year without harming the public interest of the constituents. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, in respect of pending ongoing projects, the committee observed that the critical cause of pending ongoing projects being common in the constituencies was partial allocation of funds for projects. The committee therefore recommends that the NG-CDF board should, with immediate effect, discourage the partial allocation of funds to projects and ensure that projects are completed at most within 2 financial years. Further, NG-CDF committee should ensure proper costing of the projects is done through consultation with the relevant government and departments to to ensure realistic cost estimates. And the NG Board should come up with a realistic policy framework